hearing?
Yeah. So welcome to the NYCD16-Indivisible Forum on Public Education in New York State. My name is Benjamin Gallagher. To introduce myself a little bit quickly, I grew up and attended the public schools in Riverdale, among other places, and I recently moved back there with my wife and 2 kids. I'm interested in educational equity issues, and so I am helping to form NYCD16-Indivisible's new education committee, which I hope you all will consider joining. By a show of hands, is anyone here a teacher?
Or educator, right?
Has anyone, yes, or educator. Has anyone here worked in a New York State public school? This evening, I have the pleasure of introducing our featured speaker, New York State Senator Shelley Mayer, who is chair of the Senate's Committee on Education. Shelley has made public education a cornerstone of her time in public service, first as an assembly member and now as a state senator. She secured significant funding for several school infrastructure projects in Yonkers, and repeatedly fought for greater funding for Yonkers public schools during her time in the Assembly. She's now putting public experience to work in her position as chair of the State Senate Education Committee. Shelley grew up in Yonkers and went to Yonkers public schools for much of her childhood. She now lives in Yonkers in the very same house in which she grew up. Shelley received both her bachelor's and law degrees from public universities, and she had a long career as an assistant attorney general under Bob Abrams in the New York State Attorney General's office. Shelley has also held a variety of other positions in which she served as legal counsel to major public and not-for-profit institutions. These include chief counsel to New York State Senate Conference in Albany, vice president of government and community affairs at the New York Teaching Hospital Network, known as Continuum Health Partners, which is now merged into Mount Sinai. And those were just her day jobs. She was also a library trustee and active member of the Democratic Party and other volunteer organizations. So we know that Shelley brings a wealth of knowledge of government and public institutions to this issue, and we are grateful to her for taking the time to speak with us tonight. Welcome, Shelley, and thanks for being here. And very briefly, yes, I also would like to introduce, switching to this, Mike Rubiak, who's also joining us. He's the regional political organizer for the New York State United Teachers, a federation of more than 1,200 local teachers unions around New York State with over 600,000 members.
Thank you, everyone. Stand. You're all welcome to my house. Same house I grew up in. That's all right. Oh.
So sorry. Just to introduce the format, because we all come to this issue with different amounts of prior knowledge, we're planning to have about a half hour where I'll be asking Shelley some questions to get a basic overview of what has been going on with public education and what can be done to improve it in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. Then we're going to open the floor up to about a half hour of questions from the audience. It may be more like 20 minutes or at this point, depending, as we are going to wrap up at 7:40, so we can keep within the window of time that we're allowed to use this wonderful space of the library. So sorry about that. How did you become interested in educational issues, Shelley?
I'm going to break the format, sorry. I have to introduce a number of my colleagues who are here in government, and I so appreciate it. Nader Sage, Assemblyman for the 90th District. It's a great job, I loved it. I see Florence McHugh, Secretary Treasurer of the Washington Department of Senate Labor Council on the State Board of Education. John Rubo, Council Member of City of Yonkers. Michael Sabatino, Majority Leader, Yonkers City Council. I saw Lionel Turner, President of CSEA, over here in Yonkers. I think they had someone else. I'm looking at my notes. And I just want to acknowledge and thank so many of our community advocates who are here, who have been in it for the long haul, for Yonkers, I know for Ossining, for other districts that are here. Thank you very much for being here and being part of it. So now I'll go back to the question, sorry. How did I get interested in education? Well, I think education is the path to the middle class for every student. And when you have communities as diverse as Yonkers, which I was fortunate to grow up, and I frequently tell the story of when my parents bought a house in Yonkers, my mother asked the neighbor, how are the schools in Yonkers? And they said, they're excellent. And she said, fine, we're moving here. And that was it. You know, we wanted to move to a place with excellent public schools. We want to continue to have diverse communities like Yonkers, New York City, Ossining, Peekskill, Portchester, all of our communities that have particular urban challenges, make sure that they have enough money. And so I only represented Yonkers when I was in the assembly. It became the thing you do is fight for Yonkers and Yonkers school funding. So I'm very passionate about it, and I also like schools. I think a great education is an extraordinary experience. I tell the story of the 5th grade teacher I had at what is now Casimir Pulaski School. When we were in 5th grade, she asked us to redesign the Lincoln Center area. This was a long time ago before there was Lincoln Center. There were apartments there. They tore them all down. This teacher created this inspiring opportunity for students of my age to think creatively, artistically, structurally about a problem. That is what a great teacher can do. And we have great teachers. Not all teachers are great. You know, Mike might disagree. Not all teachers are great. But on the whole, teachers are in it for the right reasons, and we need to give them the tools to succeed. And then we need to give our students what they deserve. And what I found is our students in Yonkers, and now as chair of the Senate Education Committee statewide, do not have the resources that they are entitled to and that they need in order to succeed. I've been in a battle with the governor because he, in my opinion, has not put enough money into foundation aid, which I know you're going to ask me about for this year's budget. Statewide, he put in $338 million. The region said that we needed, just to begin to phase in the full funding of foundation aid, I know we're going to talk a little bit about that, over $1 billion. He put in $338 million. That's nothing. It's an unacceptable start. And he disagrees with us that foundation aid is required to be paid to our schools. He disagrees legally, and he and I have disagreed. So my view is we have an obligation, those of us who are in the state legislature, who have the power of the budget, to do the best we can, to push back as hard as we can, to fight with our allies and our parents and our boards and our community leadership to make the case that this number one, is completely inadequate, and then two, the way it's distributed is no longer the right way to distribute it. So that's the fight we're in right now.
Great, and now you get to keep that. Thank you for touching on several issues that I think we're going to come back to, but you're anticipating my questions, which is excellent. I'm just kind of laying the groundwork. Going back a bit further before the current fight, are there any problems that you saw growing up in public schools, or that your kids, maybe you've seen with your kids, that are still problems now, you know, a generation later or more?
Well, I think there's a range of problems that continue. When I went to school, Yonkers schools were segregated, basically. The schools on the west side of Yonkers were much more minority districts. The schools on the east side where I live were Italian and Jewish and Irish. And Yonkers went through a major lawsuit challenging this, and the court found that there was intentional discrimination, both in housing and education. There had to be a remedy. And we are still living with the remedy. There are people who don't like the remedy, but the remedy is, and it's different than my time then, is that a significant number of students from Yonkers live in Southwest Yonkers, the majority of the students of our public schools. And we have to find a way for them to have access, their parents to be able to choose what schools they go to, and to choose, you know, there's a range of performing schools. There's high performing schools and less high performing schools. That's all right. You have good music though. Okay. Parents want their kids to go to the best schools they can get into, and yet they're mindful that their kid has to spend a long time on a bus. So it's a challenge to make it work in big cities like Yonkers. And so it's a challenge. That doesn't mean we don't try to fix it and try to address it and do the best we can. So the effort to truly have an integrated school district in a big city like Yonkers that's geographically challenging is a challenge. That's less the problem in the smaller districts like Portchester, which I represent now, But there are schools in Portchester that are all Latino, and there are schools in Portchester that are mixed. And these issues of how do we bring about a diverse community in school is something that I care a great deal about. I think we need to confront that head on. It isn't perfect, and it doesn't work perfectly, and there's lots of bumps along the road. But we are aiming for a society where children learn together and learn about each other and benefit by learning that there are differences in the world. And that's what I wanted for my children, and I think that's what most people want for their children. And our job is to try to find a district that help districts achieve that.
We're going to be talking quite a bit about education funding, and thank you for that answer. There's a lot to chew on there. But before we get into funding, I just want to understand a few things about the big picture, and I apologize if people already know the answers to these questions. So where does funding for public schools come from?
The state budget is about $170 billion, and the school aid is about $26 billion. School aid per year of New York State is about $26 billion. So out of the general fund, which is the money that's the state's only, not mixed with federal money that passes through, education is about 40% of the total state budget. It is slightly more than the healthcare. Education and healthcare are the big pictures in the room. Education is the biggest picture. So a very significant share of funding for education comes from the state government. However, the amount that districts receive is very diverse and disproportionate. Some districts receive about 97% of their total state budget from the state government, and some districts, for example, Yonkers gets about 50%. Bronxville probably gets a very small amount, and I'll talk about why. There are some understandable reasons and some not so understandable reasons, some things we should change, and some things that are baked into the strategy of how this funding formula, I'm calling it a formula, how the funding is intended to address need, which I'll talk a little bit about. But you're talking about a whole lot of money, a lot of taxpayer money, and people are entitled to know as much as they should about where that money goes and how effective it is. And I always say in school audiences, because you're all advocates, that's why you're here, but there's a lot of people who don't think public schools are on the top of their list. Either their kids already grew, they are finished with the schools, their kids go to private school, school funding is not their issue, and yet they resent the amount of property tax, income tax, or other tax they pay for our schools. And we have to do a better job, and I've said this to the teachers and others, of making sure our schools are assets of the community. They don't only belong to people who have kindergartners through 12th graders and the parents who go to the PTA and do the bake sale. They belong to a community, they're paid for by a community, they should be open more, they should be available more, and they should be seen as belonging to the community. We are losing our friends in fighting for school funding by people who resent paying for something that they have nothing to do with. And so I do think we have a challenge, and we ought to be frank about it. We have to do better in selling schools as community assets.
Shelley, can I just hop on? Just one quick thing I wanted to mention. One of the reasons we do have such a large school funding budget is New York State is unique in the country where we have a New York State Constitution that mandates that every single child gets a fair and equitable public education. So it's something not a lot of people think about outside of our New York bubble, but it's really important to understand that we're lucky here because we actually put that and codified that in our state constitution because we believe in public education fundamentally. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point, and we're going to talk about the case.
Yeah.
Maybe.
We have to talk about it.
We're moving fast, which is good. So I think implicit in that answer was you explained how much of the state's budget goes to public education. So $70 billion roughly overall pie, $26 billion of it going of the state's 170, so why is that 40%?
That's all the state budget, and the state share is much smaller.
Right, got it, so the state share.
So the state makes decisions about federal money.
Right.
So now, if we only talk about the state share, it's about 40%.
Got it. So in addition, as you sort of implied, there's this federal money that's coming through that helps fund it, and then there's local money that's contributing it, which comes primarily from property taxes, correct? And so who decides how that education funding gets spent?
It's a $50,000 question. Well, I have to back up and go to the point that Mike raised. So, in 2006, I believe, the decision was rendered by the Court of Appeals after 13 years of litigation, primarily by New York City parents, challenging the way the New York City schools were funded by the state. And there is this language in the New York State Constitution, not the federal, but the state Constitution, it says basically that it was interpreted to mean that every child is entitled to a sound basic education. That is the language the Court of Appeals said. And they said it's up to the legislature to fix this and ensure that every child gets that. And basically they said, we sort of punt to the legislature, you fix this, but if you don't fix it, we're going to come back and look at it again. So 2007, you may remember, Governor Spitzer, for the short time, was governor. When Governor Spitzer was governor, we came up with a new way to distribute money based on need. That is what is now called the formula. It's enshrined in the education law in New York. There's some basic premises. Number one, property value of a community, not a county. And let me just correct some of our Yonkers people. It is not Westchester County. Property value of Yonkers, income wealth of Yonkers as compared to the statewide average is one very important measure, because the idea was a wealthier community that has wealthier people paying property tax can provide a greater share of the cost of educating the children. A poorer community with less property value and less income wealth could provide less. That was the theory. There were other factors built into this formula. It's in the law. What is called a pupil needs factor. That is really an attempt to measure how poor the district is and how poor the kids are. Two separate measures. One was a census measure of the whole district, and one was the free and reduced lunch, which was kids in the school who was eligible. And then there was an English language learner, a factor entered in. One thing that happened at the time this was adopted, everyone was held harmless from what happened before. So if you were already getting a disproportionate amount, nobody went down. That's because we're all elected and we represent our communities. I mean, so the people from Buffalo weren't going to say, oh, we'll take a cut so New York City can get its more. No. But there wasn't enough money to fund this whole effort. So this formula, which is in the law, and people act like it's magical. It's not magical and it's not perfect. It is not perfect at all. We started to fund it incrementally. It was supposed to be phased in. Then the recession hit. The recession hit and there was no money to go back to continuing to fund it. So we had the gap elimination adjustment. Some of you may remember that. That basically took money away. You went down in the amount of money you were supposed to get. Eventually, the gap elimination adjustment was restored. And now we're back where the full amount of what is probably owed is $4 billion to the entire state. $4 billion. We don't have $4 billion laying around in Albany. So the goal is to gradually get back to the amount that is owed. Now, I'm sorry to get into the weeds. Is it okay, or you want to stop me?
I think that's a good place to pause. Just because I know that we are going to come up on time limits.
Okay.
But that was, I think, an excellent introduction. So just getting back to the question, who decides how that education funding, even if it's substantially below $4 billion, how it gets spent?
Well, there's several ways in which it's decided. One is you take what you got last year, which is in a document that is publicly available on the New York State Division of Budget website. It has every district in the state. There's how many? Over 700 districts. How much you got last year. Then the governor comes out with a proposal, and his proposal, like this year, then there's another projected amount how much you would get if his proposal was plugged into this formula. So there's a number, a projected number, based on, again, theoretically, you stick numbers into a formula and you come out with an end result. How much foundation aid is the basic element of schools that have needs. And then there's other kinds of things, and we shouldn't leave them out. Reimbursable aids, things you pay for and you want to get back. Busing, school books, there's a range of things. And I'm not even talking about capital. And those of you from Yonkers know that's a whole nother kettle of fish, and I'm happy to talk about it. Leaving that aside, we're not talking about capital now, we're talking about reimbursable expenses that a school must provide. They have this expense, they submit it to SED, the State Education Department, they get some portion of it back. So part one is the numbers are plugged into a formula. Part two is politics. It's no surprise, right? The Senate Republicans, who controlled the Senate until this year, were largely from Long Island. They directed a very significant amount of money towards Long Island and to upstate schools. Schools that were represented primarily by Democrats, like the city of New York and the downstate suburbs, particularly poorer districts, did not fare very well because politics does enter into it, and some of you know that by how hard we fought for Yonkers and able to get money. That's because we were tenacious advocates. Not only that we needed it, that's true, but also, you know, we unified and had everybody go up there and explain to the governor's office why we needed it. And through that process, we're able to get more than we would have gotten just in the formula. And every year since I was elected, working with Andrea and Gary and who else was there? Me? George. For the short time George was there, but he was in the minority, so they didn't have much chance. We fought to get extra above the governor's number for Yonkers, extra. So politics is part of it. And on top of that, some districts have unique problems that are structural. Yonkers has a structural problem. Every year, this year it's 60 million, we're starting with a 60 million budget shortfall. Ossining has a problem because they never change the amount of reimbursement to reflect the changes in the Ossining School District, increased enrollment, decreased property wealth, more English language learners, same Portchester, and their percentage of foundation aid was low. Only to say that there's the formula and there's politics, both entered in, and let me just say at the end of the day, the governor's office, which is, I'm just going to give a little word of wisdom here. We don't need the governor's office to be our foe, in my opinion. At the end of the day, you go and ask for money from the division of the budget, which is run by the governor's office. They really control the money. One of the reasons I have been working well with my colleagues and doing well as we could for Yonkers is we went in and made the case for Yonkers again and again. I think the governor is wrong on the law. I criticize him on the substance, not on the person. That's just as my 2 cents for advocates. I don't know if everyone agrees. I have some colleagues who don't agree with me. My view is at the end of the day, we need the division of budget to be our ally and to help us drive money to the districts that need it most and to fix some of these structural problems like Yonkers and Ossining, Portchester, Wyandanch, Lackawanna. There's districts all over the state that are in a particular mess. We have to fix those. Sorry you're going so long.
No, thank you. Just to dig down, and maybe this is obvious, so I think what you're talking about is the process of allocating money within the state's budget. And so then, which first involves a comparison to this theoretical formula, given that we don't have $4 billion, we have, say, 1 point something billion dollars, so your share, it would have been X in the $4 billion, and now it's X minus because the budget is this smaller pie. But then the politics enters into it because you want to get a little bit more than that share according to that. But then the next question is, what is this money actually for? So like you're talking about, this advocacy process where you say, we have this huge population of ELL students, for example. We need the money for that, and this formula doesn't recognize how much money that takes, or special needs students, or whatever, like you were alluding to earlier. But then the question is, do you then have to use that money you advocated for that specific purpose you advocated for? What if you want to hire more teachers, or get some better library books, or any number of other things?
Well, I'm so glad you raised that, because not all school money is fungible. Not all money can be switched from thing to thing. It's not like they give the superintendent and the board, here's a pot of money, $1 million, you use it. Some money comes with strings attached. A lot of money comes with strings attached. And the strings attached are not always what the superintendent or the board would choose. Example, this year, community schools set aside, I'll talk about that. So there's some schools that have low performance, have been identified as specially needing within a district, okay? Let's say City of New York has lots of them. Some schools are poor performing, some schools are better performing. Same in Yonkers, all the big districts have this problem. So the governor says, okay, I'm gonna give you $338 million in foundation aid. That was his proposal this year. But $50 million of that is for community schools. If you don't use your money for what's allocated to you for your community schools, that's the only place you can use that money. Now, what if Evan Casada, the superintendent of Yonkers, said, no, I'm doing pretty well over here, I got grants, I'm doing fine, I'm holding it together, and the school's improving. I need that $50 million for hiring an extra guidance counselor, or an extra half-time art teacher in some other school, he will not have that discretion under the way the governor has proposed it. So one of the things we do in the legislature is fight to take the strings off this money and give as much authority as possible. However, not to complicate, and here comes the president of the Yonkers Federation of Teachers. Hello. Samantha Rosado Ciriello. Yes, I was going to.
So just to quickly add on that point, this year the increase in the budget for school funding is $956 million, and out of that $956 million, $500 million has been earmarked for a special purpose.
Right. So there's strings attached all over the place. And it's partially because the governor, through the budget, tries to drive a policy agenda about schools. It's not like he says, I want to fund schools, so here's all the money, you guys divide it up however you want. No, everything reflects something. And so one issue, which I don't know if you're going to get into, but it's important to know, is that last year or 2 years ago, we required that districts, several districts, not all, provide school-specific data. So, okay, City of New York, hundreds of schools, they had to file a document for every school showing how much is spent per school. Now that's a legitimate, I happen to not be opposed to that, because I sat with colleagues from the Bronx who said, we're fighting for all this money, and John, you can understand, I'm fighting for all this money. My kid is going to a school that has nothing. Well, how did that happen? I sat up here and argued and fought for the governor to get us this money, and now somebody's got it somewhere, but it's not in my kid's school. So this school-specific data was required of the Big Five. It's New York City, Yonkers, Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse, a number of other districts. It's going to be required of every district starting this year. However, the governor took that data and then he, in my opinion, incorrectly analyzed it and used it to say, if you don't use a percentage of the money I am allocating to you for those schools, you lose that money. So for Yonkers, for example, he targeted certain schools in his presentation, which offended people from Yonkers, but I did not take it too seriously. And he said, if you don't use it for these schools, you're gonna lose it. Now, for the city of New York, this is a big deal. And he made it quite punitive for the city of New York. Because there's a large number of schools that, and it's a lot of money, and they could lose a significant share of what they have. But this whole tying of money to conditions is something he has done, and the Assembly Democratic majority, which Snyder is part of and I was part of, was traditionally the advocate for the traditional public school money. They were fighting for take the strings off, get more, get as much flexibility for the district, for local control, for our Board of Education, our PTAs, make sure the voices of community is heard. But we have push and pull with the governor on this, so I'm just explaining the context. I'm sorry to be so, it's a technical area, and I'm making it technical, so.
Thank you for explaining that. So, let's see. So at what point, I'm going to stop there in kind of the sort of big picture discussion and just ask one last question. At what points in the process you just described, or several processes you just described, can ordinary citizens have a voice or a role?
Well, that's a great question. A lot of people here who have taken that role time and time again, and I just want to thank you for stepping up. And I've been very fortunate to have worked very closely, not only with the teachers, with the PTAs, the Board of Education, the superintendent, the mayor, the city council, you know, Democrats and Republicans. We have been working together for a long time in Yonkers particularly to do the best we could for our district. With all of our unions, totally all in the same fight together. But here's the things you can do. Short term, midterm, and long term. Short term, email, call the governor. Say you want more money for your district. Again, I'm sensitive about tone as someone who deals with them. You have a special case to make. Your district needs more. Most of these things they know. We just need to remind them. Yonkers needs more, Ossining needs more, Portchester. We have particular situations we want you to know. So calling, emailing if it's easier, or writing the governor, very important. I don't know that he counts mail. I count emails, I'll tell you that. I count how many emails I get on particular subjects, so I encourage you to do that. Longer term, attend Board of Education meetings. Be a voice. I was disappointed, very frankly, at the last Board of Ed meeting I was at. I think, I don't know, teachers were there, but maybe one or two parents. This is a district of 27,000 students. You know, we have to get parents, and it can be complaining, it's fine. Come and complain. It can be a non-parent, a plain property taxpayer. It can be someone who doesn't pay property taxes, but has an idea, an issue. Make your voice heard. I think, and Nader was on the board, he knows better than me, but board members need to hear from people who have a view. Otherwise, they go about their business and do what was on the agenda, and generally that goes. And the third thing, honestly, we need more people who care about public education to run for office. At the local level, particularly, to stand up. We haven't even talked about the local share in Yonkers. Is always a point of contention where we're trying to get more. The more advocates, that we have in every level of government who say public education is important, we care about it, we are committed to it, we know it's expensive, and we need to get our money's worth. We do not want to get cheated or have money get lost in the shuffle, but we need people to run. And the other thing is form coalitions outside of your traditional friends. The special ed community has been a potent voice in coming to Albany. They've brought their kids, they've made their case. East Ramapo, a tremendously challenged district. They, just the story, this is a minority district with a Board of Ed that is orthodox, that does not send their kids to public school. And it's been nothing but a battle. They brought the parents and the kids, hundreds of them, to Albany, and went to see everyone to thank them for signing on a bill to change it. And we did slowly begin to change. It's not perfect.
Just on Albany, March 19th is the education rally.
That's just Yonkers. There's other people here too. Yes, Yonkers, PTA, and all stakeholders, we're having a rescheduled rally. But I'm saying make other partnerships. The business community. The business community should be our friends. We need kids to graduate school who are going to participate in our economy. we have to work with them. We're not going to agree on everything. Agree on 50% of the stuff. Let's bring them to the table. When I first started in the Senate, I was so impressed from Rochester, which has a very, very challenged school district, some of the worst graduation rates and poverty rates and problems in the state. They came to argue for school funding. They had the business community, the not-for-profit community, the municipal government politics community, and the school community all came together with one agenda: support our Rochester schools. I think we need to build new partnerships, expand our friends to make sure that public education, which we have more friends now than we ever had, we've got to make the case. So that's my long-term, short-term. Do you want to add, Mike?
And just to add to the running for office part, so the New York State United Teachers, we run a very extensive program to help train people to run specifically for school board. We also provide assistance, not only donations, but we do help with designing mail, with knocking on doors, with doing phone banks. The key is you have to talk to your local teachers union in your local community, but we do provide all those resources. So if you have questions about running, if you're thinking about it, but you think it's too overwhelming, see me after, give us a call at the teachers union, and we'll help you get started.
So Yonkers doesn't have an elected school board.
Right. Yonkers is the only place where the mayor appoints a school board in the state. But that's the way it is.
New York City.
Well, they don't have a school board. They don't really have a school board. They have a CEC and a BEP. They don't really have a school board.
New York City's under mayoral control, so the CECs don't really have any.
That's my point.
Within their school district.
They don't have a school board with a sign. Yes, each one is slightly different, but where there are elected school boards in communities throughout Westchester and New York, we want to encourage people to run for school board.
We also do, in the city, we get heavily, the UFT gets heavily involved in the city council races, and same in Yonkers, so we do deal with mayoral control in that way.
And I just would say New York City mayoral control expires this June. And so in the budget, the governor proposed a 3-year extension. The people in my conference, that's the Senate Democrats, who now have 39 votes, a lot of them are from New York City. They want a change with far greater involvement of parents, a bigger role for other stakeholders. They're not opposed to the mayor having oversight and accountability, but they want more voices that have a voice or a seat at the table. And they're not calling it mayoral control, they're calling it mayoral accountability. So I'm learning my New York City language, and I am changing.
We keep going or?
Right, yeah, I was just going to say, I think this gives us about 20 minutes for questions, and if for some reason there aren't enough questions, I have plenty more. So let's get going.
I have a big question.
A big question.
You know me, Shelley, I'm coming in.
Oh.
Hi, Roger Cashone, very, very informative. I think that's great. I just wanted to mention one other thing
Yes.
from an outreach perspective.
Yes.
Junior Achievement is a wonderful organization. I've been participating for about 10 years. I've been in schools in Brooklyn, the Bronx, even Yonkers School 5, where I attended. And one thing that I noticed, there were no smart boards in the classrooms, and I felt bad. It's not like you need a smart board to learn, but it was just something that I noticed, and I just think that when you're in the school, you see what's going on, you see the dynamics, and we're paying for it, so you might as well see what's going on. Thank you.
No, that's a good point. There's a school bond act that we passed several years ago that allow schools to bond for greater technology. Like some other bureaucratic things, it's taken too long to get the money out the door. Applications are pending, and they have not all been decided on. But we need to invest in technology, not just whiteboards, technology, smart technology, and we didn't discuss it here, but something that I'm passionate about is career and technical education, which I push very hard to have increased investment.
Right, and super quick, this isn't directed at the previous question, just forgot to give my little intro. Probably goes without saying, but please be polite and respectful of everyone in the discussion, no matter what they say, and keep your questions short and on topic so that we can keep a good momentum. I had a question over here.
Gail,
Sorry,
she has a hard question.
who had the hard question?
Gail back.
I didn't know which one was Gail.
Everybody knows Gail.
Don't be offended.
Hi. Shelley, if you can answer this question, I would be so grateful. 4 years ago, approximately, the governor thought because of the repeat of falling short of the money the Yonkers schools needed, he advocated for an intermunicipal agreement. I sat as a community stakeholder during that whole period of time, and that document specified that as a result of all of the parties signing on, the city, the Board of Ed, that there would be no more yearly cries of a shortfall. And since that document was signed, there has been yearly outcries about needing funding. Can you speak to that document and why we are now looking at $60 million?
Yeah. It is a great question, and a little bit of the context, and sorry for the 9 Yonkers people, and I know you have a question there. This occurred in the context of the $55 million shortfall. In order to get the money to tide us over and avoid a catastrophe, the governor insisted that we adopt legislation. It was in a bill that I helped draft to have this intermunicipal agreement. It was something they insisted on to achieve some savings theoretically by combining where we had duplicate functions. We never had, and we have never had, in my opinion, a long-term plan to get ourselves out of this structural deficit. And I believe, and I've told the mayor this and others, we need a 5-year plan to get out of every year having at least a $25 million shortfall. We do. The intermunicipal agreement did not result in that, and we had to pay back the money that we borrowed and bonded for to get out of that shortfall. And so we took all our reserves last year. We have no more reserves in the Yonkers Public School budget. So you're right, the goal was to get through a crisis, but we have not had a plan to eliminate this structural problem, and we need to do so.
Who drives the plan? I'm sure the parents would participate.
Well,
Activists would participate.
I think many stakeholders need to participate, and I think the city needs to be the prime driver. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
I think the easiest system would be if people come up here to ask questions, and then if you form an orderly line, we will keep it going quickly.
Yes, thank you. The question that she raises is a very important question. I'm the president of CACA. CACA and other groups, we have a large responsibility. Teachers, police, fire, everybody, to educate everybody and to be sensitive to those districts that are struggling, to those people who feel there's no correlation between paying taxes and public education. There's a strong correlation having a doctor and anesthesiologist. It's everywhere you look at it across this country, and you got some fine school districts, not just in New York, across this country. Models, paradigms of education. How come we don't investigate and discuss those success stories? Because when I hear people talking about education and theory educators, the absence of school aides, teacher aides, and everybody else. And from my research, let me just back up. I'm a product of School 25, going high school. When you had segregation, that football field is the same in 1972 as it is today. So we have what segregation and desegregation. Same phenomenon, okay? Nobody talked to me. CSA is not just an entity. It's a whole aspect. It ain't just a doctor who operates on somebody who having a heart transplant. It's those nurses. That nurse is coming in, doctor, great surgery, but that nurse will bring me my stuff. I'm not going to be whole. So as educators, if we don't talk about the whole context of school with teachers, parents, and others, that's what we're missing. Because we're too parochial. Think about only, if I just talk about CCA, I would be stupid. I talk about those other districts, those other unions, and everybody else. So why is it that we see the interconnectedness of everything and people in education are so parochial in their mindset. And we have to struggle with that, and we ask ourselves, what do we have to do better? Teach people the significance of what everybody do, because it's all there. I'm not going to just talk about CAC, never will. Samantha, never. I'm always going to articulate the whole thing that everybody contributes. And when we have these forms of education, the school aids and other components that gives you a successful paradigm, new shift, is never even mentioned, only as a bypass. Parents as a bypass.
Oh, can I just answer, Lionel? To some extent, one of the issues of this flexibility of money is so they can spend money as they see necessary, like an aid. For example, if you tie the money to all these conditions, the district doesn't have the freedom to hire aides if they think it's necessary. To hire all the range of the services that your members provide that are essential. And if I minimize them, I did not intend to, as you know. One of the challenges is we get down into the nitty-gritty of just getting the money. And then we have to persuade the district to do the right thing, because it's a whole village. It's not one person. It's a whole village in the school.
Right, it's happening to be right. And our struggle with ourselves and our coalitions with all the other groups, I don't want to struggle for the major plan and forget somebody else.
Understood.
That's what I'm saying.
Understood.
As an organizing principle.
That's a good point.
Just to piggyback on that just quickly, I get really excited when I see this movement of strikes all across the country, and it's really led by the educators in the classrooms and what I would call so the school-related professionals, so the cafeteria workers, the bus drivers, the teacher aides, because they're not advocating for salaries, they're advocating for what you were saying, for more resources for the school and less privatization, where that money is going to be spent by the community, for the students. So thanks for bringing that up. I think it's important in this context.
And we didn't get to talk about charters, but that is at a statewide level, not a local level. That is a big part of the money conversation. We didn't get to talk about it, but that's to Mike's point. Okay, sorry.
Hi, I'm from the Bronx, and I work for the Board of Education in the area of testing. And I'd like to raise a testing issue, but there's money involved in testing, as you know.
Yep.
And right now, we have a 5-year contract with a publisher called Questar to do the statewide exams. Prior to this contract, we had Pearson doing 5 years. And the parents felt very strongly that the tests weren't very meaningful, and that they actually, the movement grew exponentially from 2013 to 2015 to 20% of the parents are holding their kids out of the testing. I have studied this for a long time. Pearson got by for 5 years without presenting much information about its tests, and there was no transparency. Right now, we have Questar now 2 years into its 5-year program. So far, we have the same stone wall of non-information from the State Education Department. We're going to approach the 3rd year of testing in April, and I believe that a forceful case should be made for more information coming out now, a month before the tests are given, so that we don't repeat the history that we had with Pearson. Otherwise, parents will be misled, especially in New York City, where the results show what everybody knows, that ELL kids can't possibly do well on an English language arts test, that special ed kids struggle with these tests, and that the minority children also do very badly on these tests. It's really a question of who's accountable for what. The test publisher has to be made accountable for the tests.
Well, I appreciate the question too. It's sort of 2 comments. One is I was very proud to sponsor this year the bill that separated the mandatory use of tests with teacher evaluation. So that passed overwhelmingly. That's signed by the governor. That was a very important step forward. I want to make one comment because we have a different Board of Regents than we had when we started this testing mess, if I would call it that. We have a better, more responsive, more parent-focused, classroom-focused
Not perfect.
But I know, for example, those of us in Westchester, we have, and Betty Rosa from the Bronx, there is much more attention, maybe not enough to the vendor, and I will always agree with you on that. But they're doing a better job of being attentive to what is actually happening in the classroom. It is a challenge. The Board of Regents, as you're alluding to, makes education policy, not the legislature. So I agree with your point about Questar. We need more information.
May I have the opportunity to meet with you and present some information?
After the budget. Happy to meet with anybody after the budget. Right now I gotta win some money.
I have an easy question, you'll be happy. I didn't understand the money. So you said the total state budget was about 170 billion?
Yes.
And 40% you said was state education, but that wouldn't be, then you said it was
No.
29 billion, I thought?
26 billion for education, and 170 is what they call all funds. That's state money and federal money. There's a lot of federal money. If you only look at the state-funded portion of the budget, it's about 40%. So the full New York State only is, I think, about 120 billion, and education is 26. So that bigger number, 170 billion, is a combination of state and federal money.
Right.
Ah, okay,
It's,
now I got it.
so the amount of, so if you take out the federal money that's passing through the state budget, and you just take what's left, that amount is going to be $60-something million. And billion, sorry, 60-something billion. And the 26 billion is the 40% of that number.
Okay.
Understandable question.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Rudley from Ossining. I'm a parent of 3 children in the school district, and I'm also the executive director of the New York State Allies for Public Education, and I serve on the Ossining board. But I'm here as a private citizen. And thank you to everybody here, and I appreciate the law that was just passed for the APPR law, and I hope it goes further, because I know there's more work to do. We still have testing that is tied to teacher evaluations, and that will still bring an issue to schools, and I know parents will still be opting out until we get it right. But I appreciate the big step forward, because that was a big step. My question is, how can the legislature guarantee that we get the funding through the legislative body? Because right now, as we understand, the governor put out his proposal, and now it's up to the legislature. We now have, everybody's on board together, both the Senate and the Assembly. So how can we guarantee that we're going to get the funding that is needed in our districts? How will you guarantee in the Senate and the Assembly?
I don't think it would ever be responsible of me as a legislator to guarantee anything, and you know that. At least I don't lie about what I can do. Here's the situation with the budget, and Lisa knows as well. The governor proposed his budget, then he did 30-day amendments. He's entitled to do them. In the period between the initial budget and the 30-day amendments, the governor said that there was a significant shortfall in receipt of personal income tax revenue for the fourth quarter of last year, far below what they anticipated, $2 billion less. Therefore, in his 30-day amendments, he cut substantially on the healthcare side. Big time cuts on Medicaid. We're not even talking about that. We're trying not to have a fight between education and healthcare. They got a big cut. Now we are left with a reduced amount to probably spend, a commitment to do better on education than where he started, significantly better, a commitment to try to help districts like yours, and to address a number of other districts that have shortfalls. What's going to happen is the Senate is going to do its one-house budget, the Assembly is going to do a one-house budget, and then we're going to negotiate, but the governor does have the upper hand by virtue of a Court of Appeals decision, which gives him far greater power than the legislature. So guarantee, no. You have been fighting, and your colleagues in Ossining have done a terrific job of making sure your voice is heard this year. Yonkers, I think, is well heard. We are going to do our best. I will never promise, and I cannot guarantee, but we understand you have made a good case that Ossining needs a fix, a really substantial fix, and it's getting far, far too little of the foundation aid it's owed, much less than most districts.
Sorry, very quickly, I think we have like to do this in maybe 5 minutes, if at all possible, so let's try to keep it snappy.
Thank you. Good evening, Senator Mayer. This is great. Thank you so much for being here. I didn't know you lived in Yonkers and were born and raised here. I live in Yonkers now, but I'm born and raised in New York City. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm a school principal. I've been in public education for 20 years. I've been a principal for 10 years. You mentioned what happened in New Rochelle to the young lady. There was another stabbing a couple of weeks later. I often have students come into my school telling me about a parent who was murdered over the weekend or cousin who was murdered. The level of trauma in our schools is overbearing at times, and I wish I could have additional child psychologists, counselors, so on and so forth. So as we talk about the budget,
What district are you?
I'm District 11. District 11. As we mentioned the budget, and you mentioned the governor came in way under. There's a big gap between what he's proposing and what the Board of Regents proposes.
Right.
It sounds like we can't get to that Board of Regents number this year because of everything else you mentioned going on with the money. I guess what number would you be comfortable with, and what are you willing to do to really push the governor? I mean, would you go as far as holding up the budget if he's nowhere near where you think he should be with regard to the budget?
Well, we're very lucky to have Senator Robert Jackson in our Senate Democratic majority this year. Senator Robert Jackson was one of the initial plaintiffs in the CFE case. He walked from New York City to Albany. His view, and I share it, and he has in some ways the ability as not being chair of education to insist on this, is nothing short of what is owed is acceptable. So what we're going to do at the end of the day, I am going to fight for what is owed. What is owed, according to the Board of Regents, in a 3-year phase-in of full foundation aid. That is what we want. That is what we are going to push for. What's going to happen if we don't get it? I don't want to get there. My job is to build alliances to fight with the Assembly, which I think we'll be on the same page. We always have been on this stuff. And with our advocates and our friends, to push the governor to find a way. I believe we need to find more revenue. I'm in favor of full gaming license for Yonkers Raceway. I think we need to find more money in the pot and not just cut in a time of difficulty. Taxes are a difficult subject for elected officials, I understand that, but there are ways to get revenue, and I think we should put them on the table. We didn't even talk about marijuana. I have mixed minds about it, but it is in the budget as a revenue producer, just so you know.
And I'm against that
Me
because
too.
my students are in middle school and now they think, hey, it's legal, Mr.
Yes,
Bowman.
exactly, I'm with you, I'm with you.
So it's like.
But to the point we're talking about revenue, we
Absolutely.
gotta build in some additional revenue.
Would you hold up the budget if they don't reach your number or our number?
I am very much a team player. I am in a conference of 39 people who care about every one of their school districts. We are going to decide together. And we have Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who is committed to public education as our leader, and we are going to act together in a concerted way. So that's my answer.
I just want to add on quickly. So there is a group called the New York State Educational Conference Board, for those who don't know. It's the Big 5 school districts, the Council of School Superintendents, the PTA, New York School Board Association, NYCD is part of it, and also SANIs, which is the school administrators. They are advocating for a $2.2 billion increase this year, which would be an additional $1.31 billion. Yep.
Hi, thank you, Senator. My name is Ruth Wanger, and I teach at Westchester Community College at the Yonkers branch in Cross County, and I also teach at Lehman College. And I just wanted to, I don't know how much you're talking about higher ed, but I think a lot of people don't realize that higher education, public higher education, is very underfunded in New York State chronically, and we're down to the point now. I was just talking to someone today. I had a student last year at Westchester Community College who's moved to Lehman now, she's graduated. You know, after you finish high school, you work so hard, you go into the college, into an underfunded public college system, you're all excited, but you know how they're teaching most of the courses? They're hiring people like me for about $3,500 to teach a course. There's no other commitment to the college involved. We don't have to spend time there. We may not know anybody else in our department. We might not even go to the main campus. At Lehman, we don't go to department meetings. It's just a super cheap way to get somebody to go in the classroom. And this is not really what our kids deserve after they graduate from high school. They should get, you know, more appropriately professionally paid and professionally hired. I don't care about full-time or part-time, but if you're hired, you should be hired to be a college professor with all that that entails. And you cannot make a living at $3,500 a course. Full-time is 4 courses, comes out, do the math, $28,000. Hello, who's living on $28,000? So everybody's got something else going, which means their loyalties are divided. It's just a stupid system. And the only reason they keep doing it is because they can. They say, oh, we don't have any money. So you were talking about getting more money. I think we
are talking about higher ed.
We gotta fix this. And I don't care about those extremely rich people who aren't in the room paying a little more taxes, and they probably wouldn't notice anyway.
We are very committed to increasing CUNY, SUNY, community colleges. I didn't talk about it tonight. Is a very much a priority for our conference, and I know for the Assembly Democratic majority.
Increase this 7,000.
Yeah, that's what my 7K.
Yeah, 7K.
We're in red now.
I know. No, we are, I didn't talk about higher ed tonight. Higher ed is absolutely essential, particularly the public universities and colleges. Okay, Samantha, are you the closer?
I am the closer, yes I am. So I'm Samantha Rosado Ciriello. I'm the president of the Yonkers Federation of Teachers, second year president. How are you? And I've been in Yonkers as a teacher for 24 years. And in 24 years, I don't remember a year that has gone by where we weren't fighting for funding with our hand out, begging for more. So I'm glad to hear that and to see, you know, a group of people who have a vested interest in our schools and in our students and obviously within the communities. And thank you, Senator Mayer, for all your advocacy efforts as well. The superintendent and I recently held a forum with our non-tenured teachers. These are our teachers who have been here for like the past 3 years. And a large majority of them were Yonkers students who are now teaching in Yonkers. So when we talk about the interconnectedness between our schools and our communities, we are laying the foundation for the future within our communities, whether it's Yonkers or New York City or any other, you know, area. And so it's very important that we all speak as one voice when we go to our legislators and when we're in our communities, faith-based organizations, the realtors. We recently spoke, last year actually, we attended something where a lot of realtors were there, and they were so excited to hear that the teachers actually spoke, because when the schools are doing well, property values are doing well, right? So it's very important to continue to come together on these issues. One of the areas of concern that I have, that somebody else mentioned, is mental health. And we have a serious problem within our school system when we don't have the support staff available to address the needs of our students. And right now in Yonkers, while we do have an 86% graduation rate and we do have award-winning schools and we're doing fantastic things, we also have a student-teacher ratio of 800, this is rough numbers, you know, roughly 800 students to one guidance counselor, roughly 900 students to one psychologist, 2,000 students to a social worker. You know, and while we're molding these futures, we need to have that support as they're moving along. Another area that we should not forget about as well is the infrastructure of our buildings. You know, when it rains and we have the garbage pails collecting the raindrops from the ceiling. You know, when there are windows with holes directly to the outside. and when there are mouse droppings on the desks and in the cubbies. These are unacceptable. So the funding is that important, and that contributes to the social emotional needs of our students. So I thank you for your support, and I thank you to continue the support, and we're going to do all that we can to continue advocating. Thank you.
So I think that's our last question. I'm going to get in one more super quick. Okay, you want to say something closing? Okay. But I think, yes.
I'm sorry, I'll make it very quick. My name is London Reyes, and in California, there was a district there that had the same issues that are going through, with most of us are going through. And they were able to legislate that music, art, and gym would become a part of the basic core subjects, and they could no longer cut or defund those programs. Can we do something like that? And if so, what can we do to assist you to obtain something like that here in New York?
Well, some things are legislatively already required, and we're not in compliance in Yonkers, I would just say. So it's because they don't have the money, that's what they would say, to provide it. We can say they must, and if we don't provide the money at the same time, they won't. So I'm with you, and we have a number of bills in my committee to mandate additional things, but you've got to put the money in. You got to put the money in. Just
10 seconds. You know, in addition to what our governing president over here said, you know, we also have some schools with 1,000 students and 1 RN.
Yes.
And on the spectrum of special education,
we have
yes,
a lot of challenges.
then also, with that being said, there is a great majority of immigrants from various nations, including refugees, and you know, there's a great concern as to do you have the appropriate or the right amount of staff that can kind of service them, you know.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. And we try to be mindful, and you know that I really spend my time making sure that I understand the issues at the school level so that we can make the case. Refugees, special needs, and completely unacceptable support staff ratio. There's just no question about it.
And I was reading an article that came out in January about I respect him, our governor, but I hear that he's going to be flexible with the requirements for special education.
Yeah.
What does it mean
Thank
for
you.
us?
Thank you for raising. He
And
proposed.
because we're already struggling as a district, so if that happens.
He proposed, I'm glad you raised that. He proposed, and he has in prior years, that districts be able to waive certain special ed requirements. We find it unacceptable in our conference, and I think the Assembly will as well. Hopefully, it won't go anywhere.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone who spoke so eloquently about the real impact that these funding shortfalls have had and the importance of this issue. I would really welcome you to join me in informing the Education Committee, which is brand new in order to, of Indivisible, of our congressional district here. And you can sign up and talk to me right afterwards. I'll be over there at that table. And so I want to thank you, and please join me in thanking Senator Shelley Mayer for her generous time with us tonight. And Mike, and if you would like more information, please see us about NYCD16-Indivisible or the Education Committee. Please see us by the table by the entrance. Yeah.
I just, first place, thank you very much, and thank you for continuing to inform us at the granular level, which I feel like Nader and I know very well. But the more we hear, the more we know, the more we have. But I want to leave with an optimistic spirit. We never had a Democratic majority in the Senate and in the Democratic Assembly that understood that public school funding was worth fighting for. I don't want to overpromise, so you can hear it in my tone, but that's the kind of person I am. We are going to fight as hard as we can, not only for the money, but for the flexibility and for the belief in our parents and our schools. So we have a great opportunity to do better and to ensure that the voice of every district is heard, which we haven't had. Let's just face it, we haven't had it. So this is for the Yonkers and Ossonings and Portchesters and Lackawannas and a lot of schools, you know, Hempstead and East Ramapo. There's so many districts that are crying out for us to hear them. This is a year to really hear it. And I also want to give thanks to John Rubel, because he's my Republican colleague who's been a great advocate and friend here. Thank you, John. I don't always mean to be so partisan, but he was nice and didn't say anything. So, but really, I want people to leave feeling optimistic. We are in this together. We are doing better. We are going to fight till the very end. And I'm hopeful that the result is going to be a marked improvement in what we have now.
For our children.
Thank you.